Diva, thanks for joining us. You, for your PhD thesis a while back, did something very innovative in social science, particularly for graduate students. You did an actual experiment on human beings. Can you tell us what you did?
Sure. So for the field experiment that I did for my dissertation in Milwaukee, I hired a group of young men to pose as job applicants, and I assigned them fictitious matched resumes that reflected identical levels of education and work experience. These were college students, but they were young men that posed as high school graduates with limited work experience. And I carefully selected and matched the young men so that they were very similar in their physical characteristics and their interpersonal style. And I sent them all over the city of Milwaukee applying for entry-level jobs. And for each job, I sent two young men who were matched young men of the same race. One man presented himself as having a felony conviction. He reported on the application form that he'd been convicted of a drug felony. He'd spent 18 months of time in prison and had just been released a month before. And so I was comparing to what extent evidence of a felony conviction affected hiring rates among otherwise equally qualified applicants. I sent two young white men and two young black men to apply for these jobs, so I also wanted to see how race and the interaction between race and criminal background affected their hiring prospects.
And drum roll, what did you find about the marker of a criminal record?
So there were a couple of big findings from the study. One is that a criminal record had a huge impact on hiring outcomes. Whites were about half as likely to receive a callback as equally qualified non-offenders. For blacks, the effect was even a little bit larger. One of the other big findings that was a surprise to me was just about the direct effects of race and racial discrimination. So a black man with no criminal background fared no better than a white applicant just released from prison.
And how do you explain that? Are the employers simply racist and active bigots, or is there something else going on?
Well, it's hard to explain exactly what's motivating employers' decisions. I think that there's some degree of old-fashioned racism in place, but in my conversations with employers following this field experiment in both Milwaukee and New York, I've come to believe that employers don't harbor conscious animosity towards blacks and really don't see themselves as discriminating. Much of what happens is a very unconscious process where I think employers are attempting to select the best candidate for the job but are affected by all kinds of pervasive and largely unconscious stereotypes that result in privileging or preferring a white candidate to a black candidate.
How generalizable is this particular part of the hiring process for these kind of jobs in Milwaukee, for this age group and so forth? What kind of general conclusions can we draw? So you addressed that by, or at least partially addressed that by replicating the experiment in New York, and what did you find?
Yeah, so one concern about a field experiment that takes place in a single city is that there may be features of that city that make the results really unique. And Milwaukee is a city that has a long history of racial antagonism. It's one of the most segregated cities in the country, and there are lots of reasons to think that maybe preferences for whites or for non-offenders are different in Milwaukee than would be true in the rest of the country. And so with my colleague Bruce Western, we replicated the study in New York City, which is a city we chose partly because of its incredible heterogeneity, diversity. It's known as a cosmopolitan and very open-minded city. So we wanted to see to what extent these effects replicated. And we found startlingly similar results in New York.